So we're going to be talking about the concept of wearable computers and the quantified self. And what the quantified self means is that you are constantly measuring things about yourself that can help you live a better life, that can help you keep your health up to date, keep yourself healthy. But the question is going to be asked in this presentation, who actually owns all of this data that you're measuring about yourself? And this is extremely important. So I'm going to start by passing this around. And it's only on this blue part to make it physically large enough for me to hold. The little black part is a computer and a radio that has more power than all of the computers that flew on all of the Apollo missions to the moon combined. Take a look at that, pass it around. And they're just getting smaller every day. Moore's law, with two O's, says that the power of a computer for any given size actually doubles every single year. And so far it's always been true and shows no sign of stopping. So what we're talking about, the fact is that computers, processing equipment, and communications are functionally ubiquitous. You can't go anywhere where there isn't communication and there isn't intelligence. It's in your car. It's been in your car since the early 90s. It's in all of your appliances. You don't necessarily see it. Doesn't mean there's a screen there, but there are computers in there. It's on your person. If you're wearing a hearing aid right now, you have a computer on you. All modern hearing aids for the past 15 years have had computers inside. And they are very quickly getting into everything around you. Light bulbs, cameras like this gentleman's very fancy Lumix right here, the thermostats that you have on your wall, and even, because the price is so incredibly low, things like packaging. So there is a current generation of pill bottles where the cap actually has a little computer and a little radio inside. And every time you open the bottle, it knows, okay, somebody opened that bottle and took a pill out of it. It can even weigh the contents. And so think about what that means. It means that it's very possible that if you have someone that you're doing elder care for and you're worried about their compliance, are they taking their pills on time? Are they taking the right amount? Are they taking them in the right order? You don't need to worry about that. You don't need to ask them to fill out a form because literally everything has a computer in it and it measures everything. And that's really exciting. What I'm showing in this picture, by the way, is a card that you can buy right now anywhere in the United States and legally use in Nevada, where if you have this little watch on, when you hop out of the car, you say, go park, and the car all by itself drives away, finds a spot, parks itself, and then when you get up to leave the restaurant, you push the little button and it drives back and picks you up and off you go.
Does it pay at the meter?
And,
can it read the no parking sign?
it can do all that stuff, and you know it also goes and parks way away where it isn't going to get hit because it doesn't care. And you think, well, geez, that's pretty futuristic. But the upshot of this is because the car has a computer in it, and the sign has a computer in it, and the roads have computers in them. They all do now. That's how they know that there's a car there, and so I need to turn the light to green. Oh wait, there's no car waiting. I don't really need to go green this side of this direction. I can keep the lights green in the other side in the other direction longer. All of them are doing this now. These things are starting to talk to each other, and that's incredibly exciting, and it's also, unfortunately, incredibly frightening. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, what is the quantified self? Today, you can go buy, for a very low amount of money, things that measure all of these things about you. Your pulse, your blood oxygen level, your blood pressure, whether you're coughing or sneezing, your respiration rate, G-load, which means have I fallen, or galvanic skin response, am I sweaty, am I unnatural subway, electroencephalographs and electromyographs, so information about your muscle reaction. Like, for example, if you're low on electrolytes or your muscles aren't working right. Your actual position of all your limbs. So, I'll tell you a funny story. This little watch that I wear measures the position of my limbs, and it knows when I walk, because it sees me do this. But over Christmas, I was at the mall, and I was ringing the bell for the Salvation Army. And when I got done ringing the bell, it said I had walked 10,000 steps. So they're not perfect yet, but they are, in fact, getting there. And it can also detect things around you. What are the light levels around you? What are the sound levels around you? What are your blood sugar levels? Are you having any toxicity? And of course, using GPS, where are you? And the important thing is that unlike when you go to the doctor and he takes your blood pressure, it measures these things all the time, 24 hours a day and records it all. Yes, sir?
Does it register, and how does it do blood sugar if it doesn't make up?
So the way it works is that they've discovered that in the hyperspectral range, if they shine a green light through your skin, the amount of light reflected back has a direct correlation to the your blood sugar level. Now, it's not perfect. You wouldn't want to use it for real accurate diabetic analysis, but for long-term monitoring to say what's your blood sugar levels over the day so that you can maybe come up with a more useful time to do treatment, it's perfectly useful, and it's just getting better all the time. So this is very interesting. This is a device. It's made by a company in Rochester based on it. It's called the Atom. And what it is, it's a device that measures very, very teeny little coughs, like that. And if you have a child who has a newly diagnosed asthmatic condition and is not well controlled yet, you put this device on your child, and very accurately, 2 hours before that child has an asthmatic attack, your phone rings and said, your child is going to have an asthmatic attack in 2 hours, and you can be ready to take care of it. You can buy this today. And the next generation is actually going to be implanted in your skin as a tattoo. The electronics are so small that they literally tattoo the electrodes into you, and then you just wear them permanently.
Will insurance pay for those?
You will, but you may not want them to, because if insurance pays for it, they own the data, not you. So, what sort of convenient things, what sort of really neat things could we do with this technology? Well, if you're reading a book in bed, the respiration sensor can detect that your respiration has slowed down. The limb position sensors can say, I've set my limbs down on my lap. It says, oh, they've gone to bed. I'm just going to turn the lights off. I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm going to turn the lights off, and I can detect that their legs are a teeny bit warmer than their torso, so maybe they didn't pull the blankets up, so I'll just jack the thermostat up a little bit. All these things are totally being done today. This is a very interesting one. For people who wear hearing aids, they have little computers in them, and they're starting to have little radios in them. I don't know if people have seen the ones where the two hearing aids talk to each other with a radio link to make sure that if sound comes in from one side, it does a delay to get it to the other side so that you get much more better positional awareness of where something is in the room when you hear it. But think about it. If you have all these computers, and they're all talking to each other, and I have my phone in my pocket, and it says, I know Ann. Oh, God, I can't remember when Ann's birthday is. As I walk up to her, my hearing aid very quietly says to me, Ann's birthday is on the 23rd. Don't forget to say happy birthday to her. Or, that's Bill. Or maybe even you're in a meeting situation that says, this is Bill Smith, his wife's name is Susan. These are all totally possible and being done today. So that's what's called augmented reality. And the next generation of this is things like glasses, where it actually floats a little bubble over everybody's head or projects a fake badge onto their chest, so that I, in my glasses, see that that's who that is, and his birthday is so. Well, it is a little scary.
It's Big Brother.
Yeah.
It is Big Brother in some respects, but it's awesome in other respects. Wouldn't you like to have that capability rather than saying, and you are, and then the person says, you know, I'm Gene Smith, I was your teacher, you fool. So the next set of things, all the things we just talked about, you can do today. There's devices. There's a Motorola hearing aid that does what I described today. There's technology to do everything we talked about. But the next generation, and by next generation I mean probably within the year, 2 years at the top, you're going to have things like we talked about, where you can have regimen compliance. If you have a senior and you are concerned that maybe you don't think they should be living at home because you don't know they're taking care of themselves, if you had a technology that said, well, they took their pill today, they got out of bed, the shower ran, it ran for the right amount of time, the sink ran, they probably brushed their teeth, I have this data, and I, as their child, can say they're complying with the regimen that's been set forth for them. Maybe they can stay in their home a little bit longer, or forever. And you can even feel more comfortable because you could have event detection. By having the G-force meter, it could say, that person hit the ground a little bit hard. I better call her and see if she's okay. Or they hit the ground and they haven't moved since. I better send the ambulance right away. And I can even tell that the person that's going to arrive, they hit the ground with enough force that it might have broken a bone. the portion of the body that hit the ground was the head or the arm or the pelvis. And, oh, by the way, I've seen myelographic action, so the legs are trying to move. She's trying to get up, but she can't do it, so maybe her hip's broken. I get the right kind of help there right away. You can also do it for asthma control. When you go into a doctor's office and they're trying to diagnose what you have, they can only examine you for a fairly short period of time. It's when you're at the doctor's office. Maybe if you have a walking EKG device, which some of you may have done, they can get a fairly rudimentary EKG over time. But now we're talking about getting all of this over time and then correlating that data with what you were doing and where you were and what you were eating and when close the meal was and what the ambient temperature was and how loud was the sound. Was I at a ball game and was I clapping? And you can correlate all of this data together. And because you're being very constantly monitored over time, you can know in advance that something has changed. You don't know it yet, but something's happening. And if this data were available to your doctor, and there's a big if there, then the doctor could say, we've seen this pattern of progression before, and so this pattern of progression means that there's a high statistical probability that you're going to have this change, or you're going to need this change in your medications going forward. This is all fantastic stuff. Yes, ma'am?
I'm concerned because the next thing will be knowing what you're thinking.
We're just about to talk about that. So the funny thing is that this stuff's also cheap. You can do really stupid stuff too. These are all real, honest-to-God products. The first one is a pair of ears that you can wear that has an electroencephalograph in it, and they're little motorized cat ears, and when you're excited, they perk up. And when you're scared, they go down, and when you're nervous, they twitch like this. And they're hugely popular in Japan, and they're starting to get popular in the United States. And you can buy these, and they're about $40.
But if you don't want to wear them.
Well, if you don't want to wear them, and it's worse than that. This is a bracelet you can wear that detects the last time you've done the motion that says, I smoked a cigarette. And if you're trying to stop smoking, it says, oh, you're not allowed to smoke yet. And it literally electrocutes you, goes zap, and it says, stop smoking. and it's locked onto you by your spouse. It seemed like a good idea when you did it, but then about day 3, you start to go, this really stinks. But that's a real product. These are odor detecting socks. And sometimes you can't tell that you've got stinky feet. But if you're walking down the street, your little phone beeps and goes, you might want to change your socks. and this one's actually very useful. These are diapers that tell you that your baby is wet as diapers. They have electronics in them, and they say, oh, you need to go change your baby. So you don't have to do that thing when you're out in public and you have to hold the baby up to take a step. So I don't know that I classify that one as stupid, but now we have to talk about what does this mean that's a little less fantastic for the average person, at least from the perception of the average person. How many people here have heard of something called progressive snapshot? Nobody? Oh, okay. And what this is a device, and Progressive, the insurance company, says, if you're willing to put this little device, which they don't really tell you what it does, in your car, we'll lower your insurance rates. Well, we might lower your insurance rates. What it actually does is say, where were you driving, when were you driving there, and how fast were you going? And if you have an accident, and you were driving at 40 miles an hour and you were going 60, they're going to say, oh, geez, we just can't pay your insurance claim, you were driving too fast. So this is something that people are being buffaloed into buying now. Now what they're claiming is, of course, that if you drive better than the average person, you'll save money. And everybody believes that they drive better than the average person. But in actuality, most people make mistakes. And what you are giving when you install this device in your car to the insurance company is exact and precise information about all of your habits. Now the question is, do you really want them to know that? Is there something that should be private? And it's the Wild West. There are no laws that dictate this. Even with the medical things that we talked about earlier, if I personally buy a device from a company that monitors my pulse rate, I've made a contract with them. My doctor was not involved, so HIPAA rules don't apply. And if you read the fine print, they claim they own all the data. It's not my data, it's theirs. And that's the real reason a lot of these companies are doing this. That's why Apple's doing the watch. Well, Apple's a money-grubbing bunch of jerks, but that's why Google's doing the watch. And because they think that that data correlated with other data they know about you, like where do you go on vacation and that sort of thing, will have value to advertisers. That's why they're doing it. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So the next big sort of hurdle in all this is who owns this data? What other data can they correlate it with about you? And what rights do you have to say, no, you can't collect that? So I don't know if anybody knows this story, but Target was sued because they sent a flyer with all baby products in it to a young woman living at home unmarried. And her father got very upset and said, why are you sending this to me? And it was because they knew, based on her phone, where she walked in the store and what she paused and looked at. They knew that she was pregnant, but her parents did not. And this automated system just sent her a flyer saying, well, you stopped and looked at baby stuff, you must be interested in baby stuff. And that's just from where did I pause in a Target store? Yes?
So I remember that New York Times article, and at least the way that they presented it
Yeah.
then, it had come down to a statistician who was hired by Target.
Yep.
And he had determined 14 or 21
Yeah.
items that if you bought at least
Yeah.
like 5 of, you must be pregnant. Like cocoa butter cream.
Yep.
No sane person buys that because you smell like chocolate, but pregnant people buy that.
Yep.
And that's what did it.
So it was what you bought, where you went in the store, and yes, and so Target being Target, how do you think they solved this problem? They didn't solve it by not doing that anymore. They solved it by randomly putting ads for lawnmowers into the same flyer, so that when people get the flyer, which is clearly targeted towards them, they just think, oh, it's just coincidence that it's got all this baby stuff in it, because look, there's also a lawnmower in there. So I think it's been demonstrated that marketing companies and insurance companies and other companies, who knows, really have demonstrably not been trustworthy with our personal data. I mean, they see us as a commodity. And here we are going into this brave new world where there's going to be all of this data around us, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's already happening if you use a web browser. It's already happening if you use your phone and know where you walked. I don't know if you ever read the contract for your phone, but it says your position data all belongs to the company. So what are we going to do about it? You know, what is the, and I don't have the answers to these questions. I'm just trying to scare you.
Well done.
But it's going to become a problem, because we're already at the point where most people don't feel comfortable if they actually know what's being collected about them. And yet, because we want all this neat stuff, we're going to sort of voluntarily be giving more and more of this away. So we really need to start thinking about these things.
Got big brother.
Yes. So we turn the lights up. That's it. I figured at this point, usually people are freaked out enough that they have a ton of questions. So, yeah, yes, sir.
You touched on the economics of all this information, how
Yep.
it can help companies.
Yep.
But another dimension of it is crime and the information that the police get from it.
Yes.
Can they use it or not? And I know there was a court case in California recently
Yep.
where it was ruled that they could not use the information that they got from either a cell phone or something to convict the person, and the person was not guilty. So where are we going with this?
Well, so there has been a bit of a troubling trend from my perspective in this area, which is that most law enforcement agencies have taken the tack that unless someone specifically tells them it's illegal for them to use it, they assume they can. And they are collecting this information surreptitiously, and they are using it for all sorts of things. And I don't think their motivation is bad. I would never accuse them of having ill intent. But the upshot is that if you look at anybody close enough, you can find something nefarious about what they've done, or at least interpret it that way. And that's the even more scary part, is what if you accidentally see a bunch of data points, and in your mind, because it's your perception that I'm investigating a crime, this series of data points means to me that a crime was committed, I might inadvertently, and when we're seeing this with the NSA now, the NSA believes that they should collect literally all records about all phone calls. That way, if they ever need to go back and investigate a crime, they in fact have it in the past. It's already been collected. Whereas historically, the rule has been, once you start investigating, then you get a court order and you can collect that data going forward. And sadly, the Patriot Act, which has a lot of loopholes like this, was re-upped just last Friday. And I think that this is only going to get worse. And unfortunately, following that lead, a lot of private entities sort of feel like they have the rights to the same data. And it's not even so scary that maybe I'm collecting where were you and you're collecting my pulse. But what if you put those two things together, right? What if, just by dumb luck, I happen to be near where a crime occurred, and at that exact moment my pulse went up for whatever reason? Somebody might reasonably assume that I'm running, or I'm scared and I'm doing something. And I might become a suspect by correlating these uncorrelatable things together. And I don't think, from my own personal perspective, and everybody's free to disagree, that that's something that I want to happen either by private entities, such as my insurance company, or by public entities like law enforcement. Yes, ma'am.
I have a two-part question. One, if these are computers, can they be hacked by anybody? Second question is, how far away are we from being like dogs and having chips put in our neck so that they can follow us all the time and not get lost?
So, yes, they can be hacked, and they are actually, it's actually a little bit worse than what you might suspect. How many people here have a router in their home, one of these? Okay. Almost every single router, almost every single one has at least one flaw in it that makes it hackable. And so how often, those of you that raised your hand, have you gone to the manufacturer's site and said, hey, I need to update the firmware on my router? I see a very low number of hands in the range of 0 up in the air. And so everybody here who had their hand up has at least one security flaw that means somebody can get into their home network because they haven't patched their router. Think about now when I have 50 devices on me, how am I going to remember to update the firmware and all of them? How am I going to know that this manufacturer did a good job? They're much more interested in giving me the functionality and selling the product and making money than in going back and fixing a problem in a device they already sold. So this is a very real concern. I mean, it's a little helpful that big companies like Apple with their HomeKit and Google with their recently announced product from Google I/O this week are making software that at least is a little bit better protected because a big company is behind it that people can use instead of having to invent their own. But it's a very legitimate concern, and it only takes one point of failure to somebody get into your network. Now your own personal devices all trust each other, so once you're in on one, it spreads out like you're done. Yes, ma'am?
And the estimates you're telling us that Big Brother is here.
I think that
What was the question?
she says that Big Brother is in fact here, and I think that, at least within the context of that book, Big Brother and his two older, even bigger brothers are already here. They couldn't even conceive of the level of data that that's going to be had about us. But in return for giving up this data, this quantified information about yourself, you get a lot of services. You get a lot of knowledge about yourself. You get, it's a trade-off. And there will be people who won't want any of it, and there will be people who will say, to heck with it. I don't care who knows about my data because I get so much out of it. And in fact, this calculus is in fact going on every day when you go on Google and say, do I sign in before I do Google things? In which case it starts suggesting to me really pertinent ads. How many people have had the experience where one time they searched for, geez, I'd like to take a cruise to Bermuda. And then for the next 6 months, every single website you went to had an ad for a cruise to Bermuda. And the reason is that your web browser knows who you are. And all the advertisers share with each other. And so a little flag got raised in the database and said, he's interested in cruises. Let's keep pushing these cruises on him until he buys one. It's already happening. Yes, sir.
How safe is this? You're going to be wearing these devices from cradle to grave.
Yep.
And you've got this transmission going on all the time. What are the frequencies, or what's
So
the health factor?
it's usually in the 2.4 to 2.5 to 5 gigahertz range. This is non-ionizing radiation, extraordinarily low emissive levels. I mean, the amount of energy behind these signals, they can only go 3 meters. Because all these devices just talk to each other. They just have to eventually get to something that sees the outside world and goes on. So they're all meshed to each other. So it's not like each one has a super powerful radio inside, mostly for battery protection. So from that perspective, very safe. There's almost no issue with them whatsoever. Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious how all this technology that you were explaining this morning, how did that tie in with the work that you do?
Oh, so,
What does it?
it does very tangentially. Mostly it's because I'm a technologist and I work for the research arm of my company. And what we do is we develop, in the same way I can put a thing on my wrist that monitors my pulse, I can put a little device on the top of a telephone pole that says, gee, at 7 o'clock last night, that pole went poof. Somebody hit it. I better go out and look at it right away. And so we put these devices on top of all the utility poles because we're liable after we inspect them, and it says there was a physical event that happened. It can also detect outgassing. So I have a species of wood like southern pine, very loose fiber bundle, and it's usually semi-hollow up the middle. So if I put a little device at the top and there's decay or rot happening at the bottom, the gases from that process percolate up the pole, and if I have a little sniffer at the top that says, better go look at this pole, it's starting to rot, you need to fix it. We also make ground penetrating radars that look underneath the ground and say, gee, it looks good above the ground, but it's starting to rot down below, it might fall over. So, yeah, technology, typically utility companies inspect poles every 5 years. If you can even extend that to every 7 years by using technology, totally worth the money. So that's sort of how I'm involved in it, and I also just like this kind of stuff. I like 3D printing, drone flying, wearable computer wearing, having nerd. Yes.
There was a program, I don't know if anybody heard it on the radio last night, about a woman who was asked by her boss, she's a reporter, to wear
Yes.
a device.
Yep.
Which a lot of younger people do because they're training, you know, they're running, they may be training for a triathlon, but just a fitness, just to gauge how, measuring their fitness levels.
Mm-hmm.
And she reported that she found it extremely invasive of her privacy, but also that people feel like they're being graded all the time, they're being measured all the time, and then they can compete with other people too. So
Yes.
it becomes competitive, obsessive, you know, I've got to get my heart rate down,
So
you know,
you-
another thing, or my,
So if I
Whatever,
time my thing,
mileage.
if I have my thing that says, this thing can say how many steps have I done today. If I told it to, and I have not told it to, I could tell my wife how many steps I've done today. And she could say, you didn't walk enough steps today, and you can imagine that could get even worse. Now,
yeah.
that's kind of positive. The negative thing about what you said, imagine we tied the story about Target that we were just talking about. I don't think it was Target, I think it was Walmart, doesn't matter. Let's say that my employer could know where I stopped and what I bought, and maybe I'm thinking about getting pregnant. Well, maternity leave is extraordinarily expensive for the insurance policy of any company. They could surreptitiously say, oh no, we're gonna lay off anybody that looks like they're trying to get pregnant.
Jeez.
And don't for a second put that past a hell of a lot of companies in the world, so.
And insurance too. For your
Insurance.
health as you
Yep.
get older.
Yep. If
All
I have
the
a policy,
problems.
if I have a policy that says I have a discount because I claim that I have good health habits, and then they can demonstrate by looking at my data that in fact I eat steak and fried dough at the state fair and smoke cigarettes, they're gonna refuse to pay my claim if something happens to me. Yes, sir.
How many of these things you're talking about are gimmicks? I mean, are we creating an industry that's gonna repair and replace all this stuff and just looks at this as a big, financial deal here? Or?
In my opinion, the current generation of devices are gimmicks. But the next generation will be real. They will last your lifetime. They may well be implanted in you because that's a hell of a lot more convenient for you. There's already a brand of watch that is driven by the body heat of your body, and their tagline, by the way, is, it runs just slightly longer than you do. But, these devices will be semi-permanent in the next generation and then permanent in the generation after that. Because you can do a lot of really nifty things. If my car knows that it's me that's walking up to it, and if my house knows that it's me and not somebody else, and that's really cool. And think about, what if you had a generation of guns that said, unless the owner's got it in their hand, this thing won't fire? That'd be awfully neat. Doesn't matter.
So related to that, why do you think Google Glass failed?
Google has often had a sort of, if you build it, they will come mentality, and they don't think about the social ramifications of what they're doing. I actually personally think if they hadn't put the camera on it, it might have succeeded. But the social once somebody invented the term glass hole for people who were wearing Google Glass, it was doomed to failure. You couldn't possibly succeed. So you've got to market the thing in addition. I think the people who have done the fitness bands by saying, if you're young and hip and athletic, which everybody wants to be, you have one of these. I'm not young, hip, or athletic, quite frankly, but I've got one. And so, you know, marketing is half of it, and there will be something like that that will eventually succeed.
I was involved in a business that did the following. They implanted a GPS device in trucks,
Yep.
and they could tell when the truck went off route. So if a truck driver was gonna make an afternoon stop, for whatever reason, the truck driver was to make an afternoon stop, that told the owner of that truck what was going on. Immediately started to save on gas, immediately started to save on hours that it took to do a job, and it's created a whole new mindset for truck drivers of not being able to screw around on the owner's time.
Which is great from the owner's perspective.
Dead on.
But not so great from the driver's perspective. I've been ignoring the young lady with the nice brooch there, so I'm going to not do that anymore.
Thank you.
Is that Bird?
It is a bird.
I like it.
Thank you, thank you. So a company like Wegmans, that
Yes.
you have this card, and so they know everything you buy,
Yep.
they know what you eat, they know what drugs you use. Do you think they respect your privacy? I mean, do they share this with other companies, or is it only for their own?
Well, so they do know. I mean, there's no. They're not giving you those discounts with your Wegmans card because they really like you a lot. They are using that data to try to more effectively market you, and to suggest things you might like, to say how long was I in the store, and you know how long did it take me to gather these things, and could I put things that she frequently buys together, or could I put things that she sometimes buys next to the things she frequently buys, so that she might get it, like do an impulse buy and that sort of thing. So that's the reason they do that. As long as that data is more valuable to them in their own silo, then the money they would make by selling it to someone else, they'll use it privately. But make no mistake, the minute it has a significant value to someone else, like your insurance company that says she buys a glazed donut every Saturday morning, and yet her Lipitor sales haven't gone up at all, they will sell that in a heartbeat. And I'm sure that when you signed up for that card, you signed away your rights to that data. So, yeah, it follow the money.
Wegmans knows I have left that store and that I buy more at BJ's now. And I think BJ's must have told Wegmans that because, what I buy at BJ's. So Wegmans is now sending me only those flyers of bulk buying. Even though that's not the stuff I buy at BJ's, but they know I'm shopping at Wegmans.
And I mean, flyers are a passive thing anyway. Pretty soon it's going to come right to your phone. And once they know where you are, once they know you're heading home from the office and you're going to go buy Wegmans in 5 minutes, it might pop up and say on your wrist, boy, Wegmans is having an awful big sale on that thing that you really like. They're really fresh today, and then you'll go.
They already do that.
They do that, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So with all of these competitors who are able to share bulk data and big data together,
Yeah.
why is it, and we're totally fine with wearing health information, why are we so squirrely at a policy level with HIPAA? Like, why can't our doctor's offices communicate in an effective manner so that we actually live longer?
Because politicians are idiots. That's the short answer to that question. They crafted a rule that's so draconian and so lacking in foresight that now that this data is, I mean, it's almost impossible actually for your doctor to prescribe you to wear one of these, because there's no way for him to actually know, there's no chain of custody for him to know that data between the time it left the device and went to the servers owned by the company and then got to him, that it was in fact protected. So he won't do it because his liability is too high. But think about how valuable that data could be. So HIPAA rules are actually a stumbling block to using this data in a way that could really be medically extremely useful and life-saving. And that's ironically the one thing that isn't happening because people can't figure out a way to do it because of the rules. Yes?
How do these get programmed? How does my house know it's me?
So When it comes from the factory, it says, I don't belong to anyone. When you bring it in your house and open the box and put in the batteries for the first time, it wakes up and says, hello house, is there any other devices around here that can see me? Oh, well, I know that the computer on the desktop says it's owned by you, and I see the thermostat over there from Nest, and it starts to build up the profile and says, okay, well, this must be your home. You wouldn't have opened it anywhere else. But even if it wasn't, even if you just went back there every night, it would eventually learn, oh, this is my house. Now I'm going to start asking the other devices around me, you know, what they are and what they can do. Yeah.
Programs itself?
Yep, they all program themselves. You know, none of that foolishness anymore. Well, they have to. I mean, I'm not going to type in my password on like that. I can't do it. Now, that's good, but it also means that all of these devices are listening and talking to each other all the time. So if somebody malicious gets into your house with a little device or hacks into your computer, they've got access to all those things too. Yeah. Yes?
You keep saying they. Who is they?
They is everyone but me.
And who is going to monitor the monitors?
No one. And that is always the problem with devices like this.
That's
Who
the
is
problem.
As the pace of technology accelerates, current governmental structures are woefully inadequate to A, understand, or B, effectively curtail abuses of that technology. And so the best you can hope for is that groups like the Electronic Freedom Foundation will at least get the word out that people are doing things wrong and try to shame them into doing the right things. But in reality, the system has to regulate itself because there's no way that any central organization is going to do it. It just can't be done.
No good.
Well,
Not good.
it's good if you like a lot of innovation, because a lot of things happen really fast without government regulation. It's bad if you want to be 100% assured that nobody's abusing it, because there's just no way to know.
Criminals could get.
Criminals have already started to know. I will tell you, so who has one of these cars where all you have to do is keep your fob, you keep your keys in your pocket, but when you go up it opens the door, and then when you get in it lets you drive. Well, let me tell you how those work. There's a very low power radio in the car that can only go about 2 meters. So when I get inside the range of that radio, it sends a signal to my fob. My fob says, oh, I see it. And then it sends the normal unlock signal that I can do by pushing the button, which works actually from a long ways away. Well, for $17, right now, you can buy a device on eBay that's a little transmitter and a little receiver. And so what happens is I get out of my car and I walk into a restaurant. Somebody stands near my car with a little transmitter, which receives that short-range signal, transmits it to his partner who's following me into the restaurant. And all he has to get is within a meter of me. My fob then sends a signal back to the car, says unlock doors, and he gets in, and it's just, this is happening all the time. Nobody thought of that. So, who watches the watchers? Who makes the rules? The car manufacturers could have fixed that for about $2, but they didn't, because they wanted to save those $2, and now everybody's getting a car stolen. Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Hand your hand up. I asked 3 questions. But, one of the things that's coming along now is the credit cards, you know, with the chip.
Yep.
And they're just starting to be introduced
Yep.
around here. I guess they've been in Europe a while. And the whole idea, you know, of paying for things at the store, they want to make easier and easier, I guess.
Yep.
It moves quicker and quicker on the one hand. But on the other hand, are we really compromising some of our important information here that can actually make this easier for other people to do?
Yep, totally. Happens all the time. The trade-off between convenience and security is well known. The more convenient something is, the less secure it is, and that's a fixed rule. There's just no way, you know, if I make my password like on my computer 67 characters long and it's all letters and numbers and weird little symbols, no one's ever going to guess it, but I can't remember it either. And if I make it, I love my wife so much, oh, she's so cute, all acronym, yeah, that's a hard one too. If I make it my dog's name, everybody knows that, and so I do a calculus of what level of security do I want and what level of convenience can I live with. And unfortunately, people tend to err on the side of convenience. Anybody in this room, don't be afraid to admit it, use the same password on more than 2 computer sites? Terrible, 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 terrible idea. Because your password is now only as secure as the weakest of them.
I don't care if it's secure though.
You don't
Do
care
I-
if somebody gets into your M&T bank account, somebody gets,
I-
you don't care if somebody.
They don't have, I don't use that password on my M&T bank account.
Nobody cares, you don't care if your friends think an email is from you, but it's really from somebody who's trying to get a.
No, I don't care about that.
Okay? So basically you have no friends.
No, they
and-
can't
and-
have that. You know what, I use the same ones, and I don't know what other people do too, are all those like lame sites
Yeah.
that make you have a password.
Okay.
And
So-
those are the ones, so,
If you take
because
out-
there are 100 of them. They're not important.
Yeah. If you take nothing else away from this, and it wasn't even the topic.
Yeah.
Go to the site LastPass, LASTPASS.com, and sign up. And it's still called that it's called the last password you ever need, LastPass. And the way it works is, you put one password in that, and then every time you go to a site that says, hey, create an account, it just does it for you. It fills in your name, and then it makes a new, really strong password, and then it remembers it, and when you go back to that site, it fills it back in again. And
But
so
it's not the same one.
it's totally different, totally random one every single time,
Oh, okay.
and it's wonderful.
Oh, good.
LastPass.com.
But I don't have to remember my deceased dog's name anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry about your dog. And no. The lady at the back there,
Oh, me?
didn't, somebody had their hand up?
I did, but you answered my question.
Oh, yes,
Practically everything you've talked about is access.
yes.
And I think back to, because I'm so old, I think back to Henry Ford
Yeah,
and his Industrial Revolution
yeah,
area, where exactly the same sort of thing happened about his new car.
yeah,
They finally found out that somebody will be using the crank,
yeah.
and how do you start the car, how do you, I don't think we should have too much worry about individual dangers of access, because it's always been that way.
As an individual, you are correct. The odds of anyone in this room running afoul of any of these problems I'm talking about is negligible. But as a society, I'm not sure that I agree, because the people who fall victim to this sort of stuff are usually the marginalized people, people at the edges, people who maybe can't afford or don't have the knowledge to do the proper things to keep themselves secure. And I think it's our obligation as a society to make sure that as a group, we're all protected, right? You probably don't care that the NSA is recording all of your phone calls. But if you were someone with a Middle Eastern name who might accidentally be caught up after having made some perfectly innocent calls and put on the no-fly list, you would care. And those are the people that we have to protect. I'm on my soapbox now, I apologize. But I do think that to look at it from the perspective of what's the risk to me is not 100% of what you need to do. You need to say what's the risk to society. Yes?
Recently, I turned my television set on.
Yeah.
Which I bought maybe within the past year or so.
Yeah.
And there is a message on the television that says that there is now an update
Yeah.
for the television set.
Yeah.
And I had never seen anything, and it said, update now, update that. I couldn't get rid of it. I'm
Yeah.
pressing on the remote, a Time Warner remote.
Yeah.
Finally, I called Time Warner,
Yeah.
and they said it was not coming from them, it was coming from the manufacturer knows
Yep.
where the television set that was sold to me at a retail store is, and I should find the remote.
Yep.
And that it was legitimate,
Yep.
and I did use the remote, that came with that TV.
Yep, that's true. So all TVs, we talked about that there's a computer in everything. There's a
What?
computer in everything. And TVs, any high HD TV, which they all are now, has got a computer in it by definition. And can I tell you that in addition to knowing what version of the firmware you were on, it knows what show you watched and every time you flip the channel, and it sent that all back to the TV manufacturer, and they're using that as a second revenue stream to sell to the advertisers.
How's that?
And when you, and that piece of paper that you threw away when you opened the box to take out the TV, said you agreed to that.
Without saying.
But that was that was the manufacturer, and when
Yep.
I downloaded,
Yep.
they're sending improvements to the,
Yeah.
and
They-
they
they're
know
all-
where
they're all
all
do-
their TVs are.
They're all doing that.
You're not talking smart TVs.
I'm sorry, this, yes.
I wondered, could you just explain
explain slightly how this chip in my new credit card helps me or helps anyone? I'm not sure how it works.
So, the problem with credit cards is that if you know the number that's programmed into the magnetic stripe on the back, you could take that number and put it into the magnetic stripe of anything. If I take my Tim Hortons card and I put it into a magnetic writer and I write my Visa card's number on it and I go swipe it into the bank, it doesn't know that's not a Visa card. It has no way of knowing. So they found, so because that's not secure, the next thing they did was that little three-digit number on the back, which is theoretically unique, but unfortunately the databases of all those got hacked. So now they've got a physical chip in there which has an encryption algorithm in it that says when I put in a known number, I'm going to get another known number back. And nobody knows what that algorithm is, and in fact it's different for every single person. And so in order to use your stolen credit card number, it isn't just a matter of putting it on the magnetic stripe of any old card. You now have to know how that chip works. You have to physically have the card. So when there's, the best security is something you know and something you have. So for example, when I log into my bank, and if you don't do this, you should, it says, what's your password? I type in my password and it says, okay, I'm about to send a message to your phone. Tell me what that message says. And then I have to type that in. So there's two forms of security, something I know and something I have. And what they're doing with credit cards is saying, I'm extending to that model. There's the credit card number, something that the bank knows, and the physical chip, something I have. And that's why it's more secure. Yes?
So when will they start using that here? I mean, we were in Canada recently.
Yeah.
And we gave them the new card with the chip, and,
Yep.
and their reader used that.
Yep.
But the readers here, nobody seems to
No.
have it yet.
And the law was supposed to be that we were all supposed to start using them, I think already. I'm not 100% sure of that.
By the end of the year.
And as usual, everybody said, oh, we need an exemption, we need an exception, we need this, we can't be ready. And the politicians knuckled under, and so I suspect it will never actually get done. Yes?
We used to worry about a missile gap.
Yeah.
Is there a technology gap between the different countries, and should we worry about the Chinese?
So the technology gap is not between the countries, it's between the corporations that are tasked with protecting our data and individuals. Because sitting alone in my house, I as a hacker sitting alone in my house have just as much power as a governmental organization because we're both on the same internet. And so I think you need to be less worried about governments because there's retaliation that can happen there, but what are called hacktivists, groups that are, unfortunately I'm on the board of directors at the zoo, and the PETA people hack us all the time to try to get incriminating evidence that says we're mistreating. And so it's a constant arms race between our IT people and this group of just ordinary people who are sitting there with computers, bang, 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 trying to get in. So yeah, there is an arms race, but it's between hackers and legitimate users, not between governments so much anymore. So let's do one more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's all wonderful, so how come I can't get my computer to talk to my printer?
That's only going to get worse. Because why doesn't your Apple Watch instant messaging talk to your Google Watch, and why doesn't your Google talk to your Microsoft? Because everybody wants you to buy their stuff, and unfortunately, this is going to be a problem for this Internet of Things, like these light bulbs, right? If I buy the Philips Hue light bulbs, I can make my iPad tell my lights what color to be, but I can't make my Android phone tell my lights what color to be, because Philips and Apple are partners, and so that situation is going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better, because everybody has a vested interest in driving you to buy only their products. And so they don't want them to talk to you. The answer is they don't want them to.